I had a deep conversation with a friend the other day, and we were really just discussing perceptions and how what other people expect of us can really become something that becomes deep rooted into our personality and into our self-worth. And the specific thing that we were speaking of is the power of labels. We were always just considering, from a very early age, how are we being labeled in the eyes of others? For me, it was Yusuf. He's that high achiever. He's going to get that great result, even if he doesn't study. And, early on, that's a great thing to have. You think, oh, so many people recognize me as smart. Like, how cool is that? But as you grow older, you begin to realize the pressure that it actually puts on you. And it's not something that you can easily just overcome. You put that pressure on yourself now to perform to a high standard at all times, which, don't get me wrong, is great. But the burden, the stress that it places on you, it makes you want to avoid trying and doing new things, because with anything, we're never going to be perfect when we start. You have to expect to make, mistakes. You have to expect to fail when you start something. And if you were someone who was labeled as a high achiever from a very early age, and that's something now that you've tied your self-worth to, failing at a specific thing is going to mean that your self-worth is now being degraded. You no longer feel good about yourself. You put all this pressure on yourself to perform a certain way, to perform to a certain standard. And when you can't meet that because you tried something new, all of a sudden now you're like, hang on a minute, that's not my fault. That's something else's fault. That's someone else's fault. So it detracts from your willingness to go out and do something new, to go out and take risks or do new things, venture into new opportunities, because you don't want to feel that burden. You don't want to feel like your self-worth is being degraded. And that's something that I've continuously battled with. It's when I start something new, how do I make sure that I'm not tying my self-worth to the outcome, that I'm tying my self-worth to the effort I put in instead? If I know that I can put in all the effort possible into a specific task, isn't that enough? Shouldn't that be enough for me? Why am I always looking to just have my self-worth tied to the outcome? Because if that's the case, then I'm never going to be happy. I'm always going to feel lesser about myself. Because, as with anything, we're going to make mistakes. And that's the only way you learn. You have to keep making mistakes. Unless you're some gifted, talented person who can start on something and not make mistakes, good luck. Congratulations. But like many of us, to succeed, it's through repetition. Repetition involves making mistakes and learning from your mistake. But if you've labeled yourself as a high achiever, if you've been labeled as a high achiever, it's more of a burden, because you're now no longer looking for ways that you can improve from the mistakes you've made. You're looking for excuses to give for the mistakes that you've made. You're not looking at anything from a growth mindset, but more so from that victim mentality. It's like, no, that wasn't my fault. It wasn't my fault that it didn't go the way that it should have gone. And all of a sudden now, you've just completely taken the blame off your shoulders. You're no longer looking for how you can grow, how you can improve. And so now, what's the point in doing or starting anything new? Anything that has a high chance of failure. So what that does is it festers this feeling, and this, it just festers this overall ideology that you have to just stick to doing what you know. Don't venture out, don't try anything new. Don't go and try and start that business. Don't try and start making some content. Stick to what you know. That's, finance, that's engineering. Stay in that field. Stay in your lane. Don't try anything new. Why would you? Because if you do, you're going to fail. And when you fail, you're going to feel like shit. You're not going to feel like you're deserving of any success that can come from that, because you've tied your self-worth to that high achieving label that has been given to you and that you've now held yourself to for so many years. And so how do you reverse that? It's difficult. If you've been labeled as a high achiever for 10 years of your life, you can't expect to just reverse that in 6 months. It doesn't make any sense. If I'm walking deep into a forest and it's taken me 10 years to go to the center of it, how can I expect to walk out of the forest in 6 months? It just doesn't make sense. Having that understanding it allows you to then, be a lot more gentle, be a lot more understanding with yourself. If you can go into a situation and understand, okay, this has gone wrong, it's not to the level that I want to succeed at. You have those expectations, but don't set them so unrealistic that you're setting yourself up for, failure. Have those expectations, fail, but then look at it from that perspective of, okay, I know I'm still new in this field. So you're being understanding. I know I'm still new in this field. I was bound to make mistakes. Where did I go wrong and what can I learn from that? Rather than saying, oh, there was a mistake that was made, but, I know myself. I'm a high achiever. I should have done that well. So that means it's not my fault. Something else happened. Life just got too busy. Too many social events coming up. Friends were, distracting me. Family was distracting me. Life at home was hard. And all these other bullshit excuses that, we know deep down aren't true. But we're trying to find that scapegoat. We're trying to justify it to ourselves so we're not feeling like our self-worth is down. So having that understanding, knowing that I'm going to put this growth mindset in place, any failure I look at is an opportunity for growth, has been the way that I've tried to reverse that label from my life. And look, it's not a bad thing to have high expectations, to know that you always want to achieve success. And sure, once you become familiar with a certain craft in your field, that's definitely something that you should strive for sure. Why would you not? But when you're starting out with anything new, having that realistic or having that expectation that you're always going to succeed, it's just setting you up for failure. You're not going to want to take risks in that case. So what I want to end off with is just, if you feel like you've been labeled in the past, whether that's you've been labeled as a high achiever, or even if you've been labeled as something like a fatty, you've been labeled as lazy, as always anxious, you're going to take those things and directly connect it to your self-worth. You're going to intrinsically think about those labels you've been given, and you will then act that specific way. Other people you don't even know will start to see you as lazy, fat, unmotivated. They're going to see you that way because you're now carrying those characteristics from the labels that you were given. You're now going to exhibit them because that's what you believe to be true. So if I keep believing to be true that I'm always going to be a high achiever, then sure, I'm setting myself up for failure whenever I take on new ventures. What you should do instead is try and just reverse out of that thought. Break those different labels that you've been given. Become a lot more understanding with yourself. Know that you are going to obviously encounter some hurdles when you're trying to, detract or pull away from those labels, because, as I said, you can't expect something that's been, put on you for the past 10 years to just be taken off you in 6 months. It just doesn't make sense like that. So put a bit of perspective in place. Always look at how you can improve. If you've been called someone who's lazy, if you've been called someone who's fat, don't just accept that. Don't let people dictate what you do with your life and how you live your life. Because if you do that, you're always going to be held to the standards of other people. You're never going to hold yourself to your own standards. You're never going to grow to new levels that people around you don't even know can be achieved. You're always limiting yourself to what other people have, limited you to. It's like you've got a ceiling on your head and people are just holding it down because you're conforming to their labels. Break that ceiling off, break those labels off. Rise to a new standard, rise to a new level that you know you can achieve by putting in the hard work. By saying, no, this is not who I am.